Speaking of great guests, let's get back to our great guest, Peter. Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us some time tonight and talking about the big guy.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's a big year for the big guy.
It is. It is. All right. We have got a ton of questions for you. I want to go ahead and fire some off to you and get your take on these. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. It says, do you think Toho will now take the Japanese Godzilla out of retirement and make their own?
Well, I think it all depends on how well this movie does. I think if it does well in Japan, they might be interested in doing it. When Final Wars came out in 2004, there was talk of it having a stateside release, but it never happened. I actually saw it premiere in Hollywood, and the idea was that it was going to play across the country, but it didn't happen. So as long as there's money to be made off of that franchise, they'll keep on doing it. But I think this would really have to be a tremendous financial windfall for them. And if they see the figures adding up, they may go ahead and put another one out.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this: now in the question here, the question was the Japanese Godzilla. If there is, does Toho own the rights to Godzilla, or is it owned by Sony or Warner Brothers? Who owns the rights to use that monster, that figure? Well,
last year there was a bit of a row with that because Ishiro Honda's heirs, he has a son and a daughter. They brought Toho to court, claiming that they owned the copyright to the creature, to the design. Honda was instrumental in sort of being the guiding force behind the picture. He didn't design the monster, which in itself is a heavily registered trademark. As a matter of fact, you can't even write fan fiction and put Godzilla or any of his friends in his characters, because it would be like you writing a short story and putting Mickey Mouse in it. You'll get a phone call.
Right.
It's like
several phone calls.
Yeah, you'll get quite a few calls on that. And the thing is that I think that was probably, the litigation was settled out of court, but Toho owns the rights to the character. A lot of that gets floated around. For a while RKO owned exclusive rights to King Kong. Now my understanding is that Warner Brothers owns it, but Warner Brothers is right now currently leasing the copyright on Godzilla, which is why I thought that if they were going to make a Godzilla movie, they should have a rematch between Kong and Godzilla. I think it would make more money than any film in the history of movies.
I think so.
Up to this point. But yeah, Toho owns the rights to it. As a matter of fact, I heard a rumor that the other monster that Godzilla was going to fight in this new film was supposed to be Rodan. But Godzilla, in order to do that, they would have to also buy the rights for Rodan, and either those rights were prohibitive or whatever the story was. But again, this could be just an urban legend that's floating around.
Now, if as an example with Warner Brothers or Legendary making the film, Peter, if we were to see a film made in Japan, do you think that they would use this character, this guy over there again? Do you think that they would keep the consistency?
No, I don't think so, and that's because the Japanese themselves rarely stick with the same design for more than 2 films in a row. The Millennium Godzilla, for example, had very exaggerated dorsal spines, and they stayed with that for the first 2 films, with Godzilla 2000 and the one following that. I get them all confused because there's so many of them, but I don't think this design is going to catch on. I don't know too many people that have really liked it, and of course, that's the problem. It is possible that they made it look the way they did because, again, Toho has the rights to that design. So if you can't quite, again, it's like the American Godzilla. You can call it Godzilla, but it can't quite look like Godzilla with the classic dorsal fins and all that. It's possible they went the way that they did to kind of get away from that and put their own stamp on it. But again, if the film is just an enormous success, it's possible. But if the Japanese are going to do it, then they have to hire the same CGI team.
Right.
Because those are the people that put that whole thing together. So I don't know. I unfortunately, there are no more costume monster actors anymore. So
right.
I don't know how good the Japanese CGI is, or maybe they would just, most likely they would outsource that anyway. But it all depends on how well the picture does, whether we'll see that creature come back again like that.
Now, when you talk, here's a question I had for you. When in the first movie, of course, what is it? What did they end up killing him with? The
oxygen destroyer.
The oxygen destroyer. But then, of course, he comes back for more movies. Does he come back, or another variation of him comes back? I mean, are there many Godzillas?
Yes. Well, Godzilla is sort of interpreted to mean the species. So if you remember in Rodan, there were 2 Rodans. So that's the way to think about it. There have been 20-odd Godzillas. So I guess if a creature looks vaguely like that, it's Godzilla, and they just call it that. And it's probably just as well, because if you called each one of those iterations a different name, it would really get confusing. The name Godzilla, incidentally, people have often wondered about this. The original title, of course, was Gojira.
Right.
And when Embassy Pictures bought the distribution rights from Japan, they said, well, that name's not going to go over big. People are going to mispronounce it. I have that as my license plate, actually, and people look at it and go, what is Gojira? And he's like, no. So what they did was they spelled it as Godzilla phonetically. So if you say Godzilla 3 times real fast, you pretty much have got the Japanese pronunciation.
Gotcha. The here another question for you. Our friend Durhuff from the East Coast says, Peter, is there a backstory in the Godzilla character as to the Japanese feelings of shame for being the only people to be exposed to the atomic weapons?
Well, even when Godzilla first appeared, as diametrically opposed to King Kong was never meant to symbolize anything. Marion C. Cooper used to get mad when people would say, oh, isn't he supposed to represent this? No, it was just a big gorilla. Leave me alone. With Godzilla, there have been so many metaphors about him. There's a scene when Godzilla approaches the Diet Building, the Japanese parliament, and he turns away. And many Japanese saw that as Godzilla representing the spirits of all the Japanese soldiers and sailors and airmen that had died in the war. They had come back to Japan. They had found now a westernized government, a democracy, that the emperor was still in power even though he had been as responsible as anybody else for what had happened. And so feeling that they didn't belong anymore, feeling rejected and ashamed, they turned away. That is certainly an open interpretation to that. I've heard that being said, but I think that Honda intended him to just basically represent the bomb, because the creature, of course, is infused with radioactivity, and that causes a lot of people to die. So it's almost like thinking of him as a walking version of a B-29. I mean, he's as Honda put it, he wanted to make radiation visible, and that was the way he made it visible.
Very, very good. Another question. Okay, this is our friend Bill in upstate New York writes in.
Well, I have a quick question for you before you ask that.
Sure.
Could you turn up the volume a little bit on your end? You're a little fainter.
How's that? Is that a little better for you?
A little better. Yeah, you're coming a little louder.
Okay, sounds good. It's one of these super directional mics unless you get right on it. Our friend Bill in upstate New York writes, it said Godzilla's son took over for Godzilla when Godzilla Sr., due to a meltdown in a movie he believes was called Destroya. What is Godzilla's son's name? And Bill says, please don't say it's Godzuki.
No. I remember when Hanna-Barbera came out with that, and I saw the first episode, and I was so excited, up from the depths, 30 stories high, Godzilla, and then suddenly,
right,
and oh my God, I nearly barfed. But there's Godzillasaurus, there's Godzilla Jr. It's not Minya, which is actually supposed to be Manila nowadays, they call him. I'm not sure if he has a name other than Godzillasaurus. I mean, I've heard that one being used. It's something that it could be on Wikipedia. You know, you could Google that and find that out. But time for me pretty much stopped in 1965. So those are the kinds of questions I'm not sure that I can answer. But I'm not sure if he has a name per se other than just a general thing of Godzilla Jr. It might be Godzilla Jr.
Gotcha. Another question is, was Raymond Burr the first choice for the American role in the 1956 version Godzilla King of Monsters?
I believe he was. Lester Salco was the agent. And actually he was the same agent for Vincent Price and Peter Lorre at that time. And I think because he knew one of the producers, they got Burr. He must have seen Burr in Rear Window. Burr was a very imposing actor, and he had a marvelous deep voice, and he had kind of a scary expression on his face too. But I think that he was always going to be the first choice for that. It was a situation where you had an actor who was available, and funny thing is that Burr, who had been in movies since the 1940s, that was only his second lead. He was pretty much a supporting actor, you know, just brought in to scare people, and then of course he clicked with Perry Mason shortly after that. But as far as I know, he was considered from the beginning for that part.
Interesting, very interesting. I was talking about before the break these what they call the Easter eggs, and the one thing that if you take a quick look at in the new Godzilla trailers, if you take a look at a scene where something went down the street and down the strip in Las Vegas. The Treasure Island is destroyed. A good chunk of it's destroyed. But if you look up at the top of Treasure Island, if you look at a few floors down where the whole building has been torn apart, the two little girls or the two ladies that are always in the Mothra movies in the pink dresses are standing right on the ledge.
You're kidding.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. Now, I can't take credit for this. I found a website that said it was called Godzilla 2014 Easter eggs, but they are there.
I was hoping they wouldn't do that because those little inside things, because they you know, I understand they want to do homages and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine, but they kind of discombobulate you a little bit because it throws you out of what it is you're sort of wanting to see. I hope they don't. I had heard a rumor about that they were going to pepper this film with things that only the fans would really get, and they would kind of dig that. But that to me just seems to be, if they were going to put them, they should have put them in the film for real. And is it Godzilla that's in Las Vegas?
I don't know.
That's the thing. When I saw him destroy New York, I thought, you know, why is it always New York? I mean, they showed a scene of the Statue of Liberty being destroyed. Well, we saw that in Cloverfield. I mean, why is it always? I always thought San Francisco.
Well, and that's where he is. But the Statue of Liberty is actually New York, the hotel in Las Vegas, and that's where the two little I don't know what they're called, but the little girls or the ladies with the pink dresses on are standing looking out.
Oh, you see, now people that are going to go and see the movie who haven't seen it yet, they're going to be looking for that, and it's like, now I see why you call them Easter eggs. When you mentioned that first, I think now I see it. It took me a while, but yeah, I was afraid that they were going to do, and they've done that too with some of the Godzilla films. There was the Godzilla 2000, where the Japanese scientist is giving a talk, and he has a coat and tie on, and he notices that his tie is hanging out, and he tucks it inside his coat. Well, that just set off an alarm bell for all of us fans of the first film, because Dr. Yamane does that when he gives his first briefing to the Diet. He looks down, sees his tie's out, and he tucks it back in, which is a kind of a typical human moment that Honda liked to put into his pictures. But when they do things like that, if you're sitting with somebody, you kind of elbow each other and go, oh, yeah, well, that's fine, but aren't we supposed to be watching the movie? I mean...
Right.
You know.
Well, and again, and then when they broadcast them, when they talk about those things, then people they stop forgetting about the film, and then they go ahead and start looking for all these little nuances.
I think it could be part of a marketing thing where you go and see the movie, and then you'll see it again and again and again until you catch all the little things. That could be part of what they're going to do. But this is all going to pop up on YouTube in just a few days.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
And then somebody will go there. Even as we speak, there are people right now sitting there texting or writing all this. Every time they see something, they're going to write it down, and it's going to be all over the thing. And it's, to me, these kind of caveats, these things that they do, I don't really care for them too much, because you're almost like diminishing your own picture, because you're like saying, here they are, the twin fairies from Mothra. Well, this film isn't going to be as good as Mothra, so we might as well watch Mothra,
Very, very true. Do you know if Toho, have they released, now of course Warner Brothers used Godzilla. I know that there is a flying creature in this movie, and a lot of people thought it was Rodan, and it's kind of come out that it's not. Does Toho, however it's pronounced, Toho, do they have to actually give the permission to a company like Warner Brothers to use that kind of creature?
Oh yeah. It's like anything else, they own the rights to that character. There was a director, I think it was Omori, who wanted to, for All Out Monsters Attack, which is sometimes known as GMK, he wanted to use Varen and Angulas. And Toho said, no, we want you to use Ghidra and Mothra because from a commercial standpoint, they're more popular with audiences. And that's one reason why you'd have a whole string of movies where you kept seeing Ghidra and Mothra. And it didn't make any sense. You've got a dozen other monsters. My daughter was saying to me the other day, I would have liked to have seen Varen in this movie, because Varen was a very cool-looking monster, and you could do some wonderful things with him in CGI. And the other thing that bugs me about this movie is its title. It's Godzilla. That's the fourth movie called Godzilla. There was the original, of course. Then there was Godzilla, which was made in Japan in 1984, sort of his big comeback film, which is sometimes called The Return of Godzilla. We know it as Godzilla 19, which Raymond Burr reprised his role of Steve Martin. You had and now both American films are called Godzilla. So it's like, even when the Japanese do that, they'll say Godzilla Final War, so you know what picture that you're talking about. But so I was a little disappointed. I thought, you get these guys in a room and a table, and they say, let's have Godzilla show up. He'll cause a lot of damage. Then we'll bring in another monster. The two monsters will fight, and Godzilla will win and go off into the sunset. And, well, that's only been done 100 times. I mean, what you really have to do is to go in a totally different direction. You almost make like a samurai movie and have Godzilla suddenly show up. I mean, if you're just going to do the same, and I'm beginning to wonder if Godzilla is passé, because if all you're going to do is have him destroy a city, well, we've kind of been there and done that. I mean, granted, with CGI, you can do anything. You can do scenes of mass destruction, and the scenes that I have seen look very effective, and helicopters falling out of the sky and all. It's done extremely effective. But if you're just going to make it an effects movie, it's just going to be a visual treat, and it won't be an emotional one. And
right.
Films like that come and go very quickly.
When Peter, when Honda started doing all these other movies, like one of my favorites is Destroy All Monsters. I just like that film. I think it's one of my favorite ones. It seemed like the first film had so much heart and inspiration in it, but then they got really hokey. I mean, do you think it was just, look, we got to keep this creature moving forward and going, or do you think it was a money thing? With all the research you've done, because the first movie was a masterpiece, but then they actually got real strange.
Well, the first one was so popular, 5 months later they came out with a sequel, which we know as Gigantus the Fire Monster. It did very well. They put the monster on ice, literally, at the end of the picture. And then King Kong versus Godzilla came out in 1961, I believe, in Japan. Might have been 62. Make that 62. It was the original Godzilla, over 9 million Japanese people went to see it. Over 13 million went to see King Kong versus Godzilla. It was, and of course there was an Americanized version of that as well. Then came out a movie we know as Godzilla versus the Thing, which was, to many people, the last of the great Godzilla films, also directed by Honda, but it didn't do as well. And then Tanaka was thinking, the producer, Tomioka Tanaka, who produced all of Honda's Godzilla films, he said, you know what, we're losing the adults. They're getting tired of this. They're moving on to other things like James Bond. He says, but the kids will always have the kids. So since Godzilla versus King Kong was essentially a comedy, let's lighten things up a little bit. Let's bring in more monsters. Let's forget about any kind of logical plot. The characters don't have to be, anything more than, cartoon-type characters. And let's just give them action, action, action. We'll make the battle scenes funny. We'll put a lot of humor. We all remember when King Kong and Rodan were battling that boulder back and forth in Ghidra with Mothra kind of acting as a referee.
Right.
That was the beginning of the end as far as I was concerned. But you're right. By the time that you were getting into the mid to late 60s, and particular by the 70s films, for all intents and purposes, they were kiddie pictures. And you know that crop of 70s films, that still stays in many people's minds. There are people that are going to see that Godzilla movie right now. They're expecting to laugh at it.
Right.
When Godzilla 1985 came out, there were full-page newspaper ads, and it was either Roger Ebert or one of the other ones saying, best Godzilla film in 30 years, hysterical fun. Well, it wasn't hysterically fun. Godzilla 1985 is a good Godzilla film. It's very serious, has some Cold War stuff going on there. But I think people, and then they started that film off with Bambi versus Godzilla, which was almost like cluing the audience in that you're going to have a good time. And the dubbing wasn't very good. I don't know. There's nothing campy about Godzilla to me, but he did have his campy phase. There's no question about it. And so since there have been so many Godzillas, and he represents so many things, and sometimes he's been a superhero, as you know.
Right.
I mean, mankind has called him to help out with the smog monster, Godzilla wasn't interested in defending the Earth as any kind of a territory. So, yeah, it started to get kind of silly, and Honda was very upset with that because he thought that the original Godzilla had a very serious message to it. He made his point. Why do we keep bringing this monster back? He says, the first time you see a monster, you're scared because you don't know it. But every time you keep bringing it back, well, all you can do is think of different ways of introducing it. So he, would come out of an iceberg, he'd come out of a building, he'd come out of a landfill, whatever. And but Honda was a company guy. He was a company guy, and we want to do these films. So finally, after Monster Zero, he said, "That's it. I don't want to direct any more Godzilla pictures. Give me something else." Because he had directed. He didn't just direct monster movies. I mean, he directed all kinds of films in Japan: social dramas, salaryman comedies, war pictures, adolescent romances. But finally, he got by the mid-'60s. He was fed up. So Tanaka said, "Okay, I won't give you any more Godzilla films to direct." Great. What's the next film you're going to give me? War of the Gargantuas. Well, now, wait a minute. I mean, just because you give me different monsters. So he came back for Terror Mechagodzilla, tried to infuse that with some class, which he did. But it's a very sentimental film, Pat, and, people aren't into sentiment these days.
No, they're really not.
If Honda was alive today, he'd be out of work because people are not into, the prayer for peace scene where you have these 200 girls singing in the high school gymnasium. It's moving without being maudlin, but I don't know if people would even get something like that now. I just don't know. Maybe it's because the horrors of the world we live in are so much more poignant than anything you can put into a movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. You mentioned the last time we had John, I don't know if it was a conflict of interest, but there was a movie which I actually thought was a great movie, absolutely great ending, was Gorgo.
Yes, yes.
Where he was captured or she was captured, or was it the baby was captured? Kind of like the lizard version of King Kong.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mention that. Gorgo has had many variations in laser discs and videos, and a company called VCI has put it out on a Blu-ray. And the version they'd done before, they had tinkered with the sound, but now they've come out with a glorious. I mean, it looks better than when I saw it in 1961. I mean, it looks magnificent. But they have a documentary, and they compare it unfavorably, or they compare Godzilla to it, and they say that Gorgo is a better film. And a friend of mine, Mike Bogue, just wrote an article where he said that Gorgo is the best monster movie of the 50s and 60s. Gorgo is a fine film. Don't get me wrong, I love Gorgo. I mean, I saw it as a kid. I've seen it many, many times, but it's not the film that Godzilla is. I mean, it's very nice, and you have a scene where the ultimate mother and child reunion.
Right.
And they walk off into the sunset, and, Sean is saying, "You're going back now, back to the sea," and the music swells, and it's wonderful. And it's kind of a unique ending in a monster movie. I mean, here's this monster who's done all this damage, and she gets to live at the end. But Godzilla is just so much more powerful. And it's just funny that people compare the Gorgo costume and say it was better than the original Godzilla costume. Well, that's just basically a question of semantics, man. I mean, that's just your own personal taste. I mean, both costumes are equally good or equally outrageous, depending on how you want to look at it. So there does seem to be this groundswell of Gorgo being a better film than Godzilla. It's a totally different kinds of pictures. But I mean, at one point in the documentary, they say that Gorgo destroys a building, and you can see there's interior supports, and you don't always see it in the Japanese films. You do in the original Godzilla. You see curtains in the windows, for crying out loud,
Mm-hmm.
So, but Gorgo is a fine film, but it is interesting that there's this sort of, Gorgo is another monster I think they should bring back, frankly.
I enjoyed it. You're talking about scary scenes. Somebody actually emailed me one scene that in the original Godzilla movie that I think was terrifying is when he picks up the train full of people and looks in it. Again, like you said, just the way they do the scenes. I think that's the original, isn't it? There's one where he actually picks the car up and he looks at the people inside the car and they all go dumping out. Yeah,
that actually kind of sounds like Godzilla 1985.
Maybe
where he picks up the train and then they're looking through the window and you can see his eye looking in.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like that, because in the original he picks it up in his mouth and then he just tosses that sucker down.
Right. Is and of course in all the movies it was the rubber suit. Did they ever use CGI for any of the non-American films, or were they all somebody in a rubber suit?
Well, me, I have a stickler for that. I call them costumes.
Okay.
I call them costumes because a suit you go into a store and you can buy it off the rack. But these were handcrafted costumes that were specifically made. In some of the later Godzilla films, they did use a smidgen of CGI here and there. Ghidorah, for example, was portrayed as a CGI creature. The thing about CGI is they can do things now. I mean, they have a scene in one of the Millennium ones where you see Godzilla swimming, and I mean, it's full-on swimming. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, assuming that a creature like that could actually swim, but we won't get into the physical things about that. But they've used it in touch with it. It's never been, they used it when, in Final Wars, they used quite a bit of it. Manda is CGI. There's a scene where Godzilla is fighting the American Godzilla, and that was done as CGI. So, yeah, they used it, but basically their whole thing was a costumed actor. And when I see the footage of Godzilla as the CGI thing, it's like, it's nice, but I kind of miss the guy in the costume, Haru Nakajima, who played Godzilla through the vast majority of the first film, and pretty much played Godzilla throughout all the films leading up to Smog Monster, and he portrayed many other monsters as well. I mean, Rodan, Varan, Baragon, you name it. on television as well as in movies, he felt that because you had a person in there, you could relate to it. Because it was standing on two legs and it had a kind of posture that was similar to a human being, so that there was a connection. I think in the same ways of having stop motion being manipulated by a person's fingers, there was a human connection that you don't get with CGI that way. When you have something like Bambi or Pinocchio that's hand-drawn, one cell at a time, there's that human connection, that artistry that you don't get with it. Pixar and some of the other things that you get, where the computer is getting them. So, but yeah, the Japanese have used it. I think that if you were to see one in Japan, it would probably be totally CGI, because that's another lost art, having a guy in a monster costume. You don't see that too much anymore.
Yeah, no, you surely
you don't see. I mean, the Gill Man. I always wish they would bring the Gill Man back, but if they did, he'd beat CGI.
Oh, the
Creature in the Black Lagoon?
They're remaking that, too.
Are they finally getting around to doing that?
Yeah, I've seen some preliminary drawings, and he looks kind of more like a lizard than anything else.
Oh, my gosh. Listen, I got to tell you, Pat, I'm beginning to think nobody knows how to do anything anymore. My daughter was telling me about this new Wonder Woman that was coming out.
Yes.
And instead of being a full-figured Amazon gal, she's going to be a skinny French blonde gal.
Exactly.
I mean, what is what they need to do is, when they have these meetings, they got to have one or two of the fans there. They have to have guys like you or me or your listeners sitting there saying, "No, wait, you can't do this, because that's a character inconsistency."
Right.
Yeah, who cares? We're gonna do this sort of thing. So that's part of the reason that, I mean, if they bring back the Creature from the Black Lagoon, they have to go with the original thing, because now what's going to happen is, guys of my generation probably aren't going to see it, because that's not how we remember the Gill Man. And the new people won't be interested, because they don't have a connection to that sort of thing. So, well, I understand they're remaking The Birds.
Yeah, well, and then the other one, the tie-in to this, of course, and I've seen that on more than one website, is for Christmas of 2015, Gamera is going to be remade, I believe, by Warner Brothers and Legendary.
Well, if they do that, then you might have that battle that people have been wanting for a long time, Godzilla versus Gamera.
Did he ever fight Gamera?
No, and the fans have been wanting that for about as long as they've wanted Superman to take on Batman.
Well, and we're going to see that next year, I guess.
We're going to see that one, and that'll be kind of these things are controversial even before they've made them.
Oh, they are, without a doubt. Ben Affleck, I think he's a little over the hill for that, but
yes, that's what I've been hearing. Yeah,
but hey, I guess if the money's right, you can get in shape, but Gamera is going to be they're saying Christmas of 2015.
Okay.
And my understanding with the existing Godzilla film, I think they were shooting for a weekend of 70 to 90 million. For an opening weekend, and I'm sure that will put them, that's going to put them into sequel range pretty quick.
Yeah, and of course I have as mixed feelings about sequels as I did about this particular one when I heard it, because there's no room for the older generation, man. There's no room for those of us that, I mean, but it's all fair, each generation takes it as their own.
Right.
I mean, look at James Bond. We grew up with Sean Connery. To so many of us, he was Bond. For the people that are seeing the new versions now, they have a new Bond, and they're perfectly happy with it. And there's no reason why you can't have 6 or 8 different Bonds, and they all had different things to appeal to different people. I just, would like to see some of the earlier designs, but everybody wants to make their own mark, and if you did go with an earlier design, which one would you go with? I mean, you go with one, you make the other people unhappy. So I can't blame them for redesigning it. I just wish it had a little bit more personality to it. The eyes are kind of small, and eyes are very important for a monster. They give a lot of expression. And a lot of your listeners might be thinking, well, we don't want him to be lovable. And, well, no, but there has to be, all of Tsuburaya's monsters had a kind of beauty to them, don't you think?
Oh, I think so. Now, wasn't there, of course, Godzilla, when he first starts out in the 54 film, he's the enemy. But through the filming, doesn't he become a good guy? And isn't there one movie where they even control him somehow?
Yeah. Well, in Destroy All Monsters, they sort of controlled him, and also in Monster Zero, they had him do certain things, which kind of gives the impression that was all he was good for in the first place. I mean, what they actually were able to do in the first film, Akira Takarada was there at the premiere, of course, and when the lights came on, he was crying. And I said, "What are you crying for?" He said, "Why did Godzilla have to die?" And when he's gasping for air and he sinks down to the bottom and turns to bones and then to nothingness, you really feel badly for him. He was such a great monster, and yet they were able to make him sympathetic at the same time that he was very destructive, which is what they did with King Kong.
Right.
Here's the thing that's so mean and, biting people's heads off, give me a break, but at the end there's a certain nobility to these monsters, and, in a deeply tribal sense, we really love our monsters.
Oh, we do. Well, I actually, with the King Kong film, I think it was the 77 film with, of course, it was the remake with Jeff Bridges, and he climbs to the top of the World Trade Center. I actually liked that film for whatever reason, but then when they made the part 2, where they put in the electronic heart and stuff, it just made a mockery of it. The first one was somewhat believable, if you will, but then they make a mockery of it with something stupid like that.
You see, that's the thing. I hope that when they get a hold of these iconic monsters, these iconic creatures, be it Godzilla, Kong, creature from Bakugan, that there's somebody there to say, treat them with respect.
Right.
We love these monsters because they scare us. I mean, that's part of their whole appeal. But at the same time, you have to give them a soul. You have to give them some kind of redeeming quality that in the end we don't really want to see them die. Of course, the producers don't want to see them die because, like you say, they want to keep churning these things out. I don't really know about any more Godzilla films. It's possible, but I almost feel like the more Godzilla films they make, the further away the train is leaving the station. I mean, it's like Godzilla's like to me now a little dot in the distance. I mean, there's nothing about him that makes me think of the 50s or 60s Godzillas that I remember so well. So I feel disenfranchised. I feel disconnected, and I think a lot of the old-timers feel that way as well. I mean, it's going back to a park that you used to play at as a kid. It used to be your park, but it's not your park anymore. It's their park. So I guess it's okay, but I just feel kind of sad. It's like, hello, don't forget us. We were there at the beginning.
No, very, very, very true. Like I said, I have mixed emotions on it, Peter, with any of these things, because it's fun to see them and enjoy them in their original, in their original state. It's like Star Trek, same thing. I love the original series. I love the movies, even the Next Generation. But now this kind of, I guess that's the new key word now, alternate timeline. You can take any movie and throw it into the alternate timeline with some sort of time disruption and redo them 10 times.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, Godzilla is one of those creatures. I mean, granted, he was brought about by, nuclear tests, but what the heck? You can have him destroy the Titanic.
Sure.
He can blow up the Hindenburg. He can be the creature that was responsible for all these things that have happened. But I kind of wish that they had done this version in say black and white, and only had the monster come out at night. Kind of spooky, but everybody's into realism and they want to see everything. When Tsuburaya did the first Godzilla, a lot of those scenes at night were very dark, and he's kind of hard to pick out. And people used to speculate he did that to hide the tricks of the trade, but Tsuburaya was a genius, but he was also kind of a quirky guy. He liked the idea of it being hard to see because he thought that it added to the mysterious atmosphere. And I must say he was right, because it was almost like the creature was the night itself. It was a part of this black force that was coming closer and closer slowly, like the Wizard of Oz tornado. There's just no way to stop it, and it's coming, and it's just in this inexorable force, and it's just marvelous.
Now you're talking. You mentioned, Peter, early on about a new. Are you in the process of a new book?
Yes, I'm working on a book on the making of the first one. I'm trying to get a hold of some information that's never been published before, because now with the internet, there's a lot of information that's also been previously published in book form as well. I know a lot of people would say, well, we don't really need a book on the making of this film. We all know that. Well, I like to think that I can tell this story in kind of an entertaining way. I had a person who actually tried to talk me out of writing my Honda book, because he said, well, you're not going to make any money out of it, and that was never a concern of mine. And then he said, people only want new information. And I said, just because you know something and it's not new to you doesn't mean it isn't new to your next-door neighbor. I mean, there are facts in this film that not everybody knows, and it would be new to them. So, and I really think there ought to be a book on the making of this film. I mean, they make books on the making of the most ridiculous films. We might as well have a book on the making of a good one. So I have this woman who lives in England who's a wonderful translator, and she's translating some of the original movie reviews in Japan on the film, which have never been seen. The problem is it costs money to have her to pay her to translate it, and so I'm trying to get the money together to do this. There's a possibility it might be out sometime next year. It would have been great to have had it ready for the 60th anniversary. And I suppose if I cranked it out, I could do it, but I don't like doing that. I like to really take my time with it, and my rough drafts are really rough. So I really need to hone those things down and get that just so. So that's the book that I'm working on. The two fictional books that you mentioned earlier, Devil Bad Diary, which I dedicated to my favorite actor and my idol, Bela Lugosi, and Terror in Tinseltown, the sequel, a very controversial sequel. I'd like to do a trilogy just because I'm real big on trilogies, so I don't know when I'm going to get to that. But I am working on the first Godzilla film, and so I'm looking at it again and again and again, and it still holds up. And the one good thing about this new Godzilla film too, Pat, is it keeps the genre alive.
It does.
If we were talking about the fact, they haven't made a Godzilla film in 30 years, that wouldn't be so good. I mean, granted, with access to movies online and you can just pull them up, that's one thing. But to have a movie out in the theater, regardless of whether or not everybody's going to like it, the fact that it's there, you have people who might be discovering it for the first time. And now, of course, with video and the whole thing, digital thing. When did all this start? Well, it started back in 1954, and then they find out that they have 29 other films that they have to
exactly
get caught up on.
I did ask you this, Peter. Have you ever met Akira at all, or corresponded with him at all?
No. I've met Haruo Nakajima a couple of times at various conventions and a screening of Godzilla they had out here in Hollywood. And he's a little guy. He's still with us. The guy, I think, is around 80 years old. And he's not terribly tall, but the whole point about him was the fact that he had this incredible strength and endurance and courage. I mean, a lot of people think it's easy to strap that thing on. It's not. I mean, if you're claustrophobic, you're in a lot of trouble. You really can't see. You can barely breathe. You can't hear too well what's being said outside. They're attaching squibs to the costume, which are very loud when they go off. You're under hot studio lights and real fires. He's only good for about 2 to 3 minutes in the costume. Then he would pass out. And then once they got him out of the costume, they'd have to drain it of about 1.5 cups of his sweat. So, like everything else now, CGI is kind of easier, so they do that. But no, that's as close as I've ever come to meeting any of those people. I know people who've met guys like Takarada and Kenji Sahara, who just had a birthday not too long ago. And I even knew somebody who met Honda back in the late 1970s. I almost feel like I know a lot of them because I've been watching their work and have admired it for so many years. But I just don't have I went to Japan as part of a thing called a G Tour, which was part of the G-Fan for the 50th anniversary, but Toho wouldn't let us on the lot. They said, no, we're not, this isn't Universal Studios, It's like we don't have tours here, so we we didn't get a chance to see the Toho tank, which was still around back then. And it would have been great to have walked into the commissary, because I understand it looks pretty much like it did back in the 1950s. And can you imagine walking into the same room where Honda Tsuburaya, Kira Fukube, all these marvelous people, these technicians and these actors. Honda was very fortunate. He was working at probably the greatest movie studio in existence at that time. Toho was really, they had the cream of the crop in directors. They had Kurosawa, of course, and many other very, very talented people and technicians. So he was in the right place at the right time to make that movie.
It would be great. It would be an honor to meet some of these people. But again, they're at that age where they're not going to be around that much longer.
That's right. There's very few of them left. And the funny thing is, there's like video tours they've shown of the Toho warehouse where they've kept a lot of the props. Even model airplanes that are damaged, they keep them, and there sitting on the ledge is the diving helmet that Akihiko Hirata wore as Dr. Serizawa. And man, if I could get my hands on that thing, I wish I had the money. I'd hire about 100 ninjas to just go in there and pluck that thing, because now the Oxygen Destroyer has been making the rounds. It was actually at the Comic-Con a couple of years ago as part of a Godzilla display, and so the prop is kind of floating around. But that helmet, it's just sitting here. I'll take good care of it. I'll give it a place of honor. But that's how we are with props. A lot of people wouldn't understand that. When I visited Forrest J. Ackerman, God rest him, years ago at his Son of Acker mansion, he would have props to things like the hand from the thing from another world, and you'd hold these things, and they were like sacred icons. When I had the honor of hosting a panel at the Monsterpalooza to mark the 80th anniversary of the original King Kong, and Bob Burns, who has a very large collection, brought the Kong armature with him. And people were gathering, taking pictures, and I couldn't even touch it. It was like the Holy Grail, man.
The Holy Grail
this is like the sacred of all sacreds, the holies of holies.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Peter, the 2 hours went way too quick, and we've got to wrap it up for the night. But I want to thank you so much for being here. Where can people get your books?
Well, my book, Mushroom Clouds and Mushroom Men, The Fantastic Cinema of Ishiro Honda, is available on Amazon. It's also on eBay. I sell signed copies there if they're interested to locate it. But pretty much, if you just punch that title in on the Google search engines, we'll pop it up. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's also available in ebook form, and so it's available like pretty much everything else is now on the web.
Sounds great. Well, let's stay in touch. I'd like to get you back on again to talk more Godzilla, but even to talk about your other book, to talk about Bela Lugosi, another one of my favorite actors.
Oh yes.
The work in what you put into your work here is just unbelievable. And again, I want to thank you for giving up a couple hours tonight. It was an honor to have you back, and we'd love to have you back down the road again.
A real thrill and a pleasure to be here, Pat. And I want to say hello and thank you to all of the Godzilla fans out there, and keep the faith.
Okay, my friend. Have a great weekend and go see the movie.
Okay, take care.
Take care, Peter. Good night.
Good night.